A quick rundown on Movement Monitor is when it looks like this, you have what I call Google colors. And when you have Google colors kind of everywhere, pardon the alarm there, when you have Google colors kind of forming everywhere, it may not be the best place to look for a trade, right? When you start to see one solid color, which is kind of easy to identify, especially with a very parabolic upward trajectory, you might want to then go kind of look at different time frames and say, hey, what's going on here, right? And you might have also entertained this as well. But when you're in the midst of this, and you walk up to a chart and you've got all four colors kind of nice and tight together, kind of shifting, that just basically indicates ranging price action. It also indicates volatility. So if we pull this up right around that time frame, if you look right there, you'll see it's very, very much ranging volatility. Price action flew up and then it flew right back down. It's not a great place to be in a trade. So that kind of gives you some perspective on what's going on there, right? And then if you knew nothing else and you looked at just 2 points in time and you said, I'm going to look at two points in time here. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. If I said, I just want to look at this and I just want to look at this. Those would be 2 moments in time that if I had nothing else and I removed all the emotion from the chart, I would say, yeah, it looks like these might be conducive to an entry. Right? Might kind of also look here. And again, this is literally like the 24-minute time frame. So I would definitely be looking at larger time frames, but I can literally just remove all the noise and I can just take a look at it and I could say, would I want to find an entry when price action taps, give or take, those movement monitors within that box? Would I want to consider that? And I think, with the right analysis and the volatility clouds included, you'd kind of look and you'd say, yep, that's a great entry. Yep, that's a great entry. And this is a little iffy. There's a little chop there. But once it started to turn, yep, that's a great entry. And that one happened to be one you could ride for quite a while, right? So let's kind of combine the data, knowing that this is the 24-minute, and we would probably use the scalping time frame volatility clouds. Let's look at what we had to work with, right? So now we can kind of see the algos working in unison. This is a great entry, somewhat obvious with the movement monitor, at a time when it was not just green but orange, conducive to a long. If we turn on the breakout bars, we would also see some orange, I have no doubt. We see a green rising volatility cloud. Same thing here. In both instances, we could have used those volatility clouds for our stop loss points, and both would have worked, even at this moment of down pressure here. In this moment of when we had some consistent orange on orange, right, or even some rising orange on orange, it was the same thing. We could have used this as an entry, especially with a low leverage long, and we could have used at that point in time, once it really started to trend orange on orange, even if our entry was closer to here, we could have used this rising volatility cloud for our stop loss, even if this was where we entered, because that's where it actually finally came back down on the 24-minute. You could be checking emails and find an opportunity like this throughout the day. If at some point you found it, you would have entered here, and you could have easily set your stop loss here. And that looks like a pretty big gap, but just going to paint some perspective on this one situation. If I entered at the line, and that was my goal, and I was looking for a larger move, and I felt like this might be it because larger time frames were saying it's possible, well, I would probably use the 2-week, because you guys know the way I work. I like the 2-week. I maybe would have looked at this one to be really conservative and said, okay, hey, even if it happens to be the 1 week, I can be really conservative and say, like, that's where my trade would go. Do I feel comfortable with that? I don't know. Maybe I feel comfortable with a 6 risk reward, right? But maybe I would only 3x leverage it so that if I lose, I only lose about 3%. And if I win about 16%, right? 16.5%. So maybe that's the kind of trade I make right here. And then it goes up and I wish I had more leverage on it, right? Like some of you guys do. But from a safety perspective, from a risk mitigation perspective, from a trade intelligently perspective, this works really well. And in this instance, the volatility cloud supported it serving as a stop loss zone, give or take, statistically speaking, the whole way through. So I'm kind of combining algos to give you an idea of what they look like, right? That was a great opportunity. You kind of see this one kind of could work. We could make it work. This one could kind of work. We could make it work. It would have ran all the way up here. I think this one would have worked. And then, honestly, actually, this volatility cloud would have held it all the way up to about here if you used it as a stop loss zone. And this requires patience, right? Because a lot of people want to move their stop up right away. But if price action is still statistically probable to adhere to the stop loss zone of the volatility cloud, then probably should just trust the volatility cloud and don't enter a trade where the volatility cloud says you could lose 10%, but maybe consider entering it when the percentage is tolerable and all the other conditions are conducive, and then follow your stop loss up with the volatility cloud and just kind of trust that it's pretty good at what it does. It's probably better than you, usually, right? It's better than me. So with that being said, this was another great example, and even though that looks wide, it's really only 1%. So you get to decide, do I really want to 3x this? Do I want to 4x? Do I want to 5x? Like, how much am I willing to lose each trade? And it might have more to do with absolute value than percentage, right? If you're trading $100, you probably feel differently than the guy that's trading 10,000. And then it depends on what does $100 mean to you. Maybe the 10,000 means nothing to that person. They can afford to lose 500. Where maybe if you were trading $100 and you lost 5, you'd be upset. So we don't know any given other person's psychology of money or relationship with money. But I assume if they're in MSAs that they can afford to be here and take risks like this because it is high risk overall, right? Even the learning curve is risky. But it's like Jim Rohn says, if you think trying is risky, wait till you get the bill for not trying. So it just depends on how you want to live life. So again, I've used the movement monitor and some of these other lines to kind of show you zones. This is a great opportunity for me to show you same thing with the blue. So I want to show you that. You could do exactly the same thing, right? Next, I just want to really quickly turn on the weighted trackers to show you how they support your decisions, right? We built these positions. We built these rectangles simply based on the movement monitor displaying activity that became less Google-like, became less volatile, and started to show a clear trend, right? So we started this one way back here, give or take, and so that was our opportunity. Could have jumped in anytime it hit the line, and then you could have used the volatility monitor as the stop loss zone if it met your requirements for, what do I stand to risk if I lose? If it breaches the volatility cloud and it's wrong, or price action turns against me, what do I have to lose? But once you evaluate that type of information and that risk, you can kind of choose to play the game. And so my point in showing you this now is now you get to see one at a time, stacking separately, what orange breakout bars look like with a green volatility cloud that's rising underneath it, with a movement monitor that's orange, that's rising with a more intense slope, right? You get to kind of see what that looks like. You get to see how, just in this one small slice of price action, how the volatility monitor reacts to price, what it looks like when it gets breached, what Freddy Krueger stripes look like when you want to stay away from trading. You know that it's riskier. Why enter? Go do something else. Find a different setup. Search for a different time frame or a different asset. Enter a longer term trade with longer term expectations. Use less leverage. There are so many different variables you can use to risk less, right? And there's always opportunities for setups. They're very easy to identify once you get used to it. So here's another one, right? Orange. We see the orange bars breaching the volatility cloud, which turned it into this, and then it became an excellent boundary for your stop loss zone. Same thing happened over here. We started to see some orange on orange, and from the time we saw really orange on orange, we had pretty nice respect for the volatility cloud. In fact, in this whole move upward, which just happened today, February 8th, we only saw one slight breach in the volatility cloud, and that was in the 24-minute. But again, keep in mind, we are using the appropriate setting. So we are using the appropriate setting for this time frame. And there are certain time frames, like the 4-hour, where you want to check the logic from maybe all three settings, depending on what kind of leverage you're using and what kind of trade you're doing. You may look at the 4-hour time frame and you may check the scalping, you may check the dynamic, and you may check the volatile, or the agile, price action, right? You may check all three. The only one you may not check is, okay, it's the 4-hour, so maybe I'm not going to look for trend seeking, but I might even check that too. And you're just looking for logic to either support your trade or to find out if it's supporting your failure, right? And if you find a bunch of logic that allows you to make a trade where it's supporting your trade, then you should take it and you'll probably do well statistically. And if you find 3 of the 4, say the stop loss is way out of range of where you're at, and for you to actually use the volatility cloud as an effective stop loss zone, you'd have to allow for a 7% loss organically, then you may choose not to take that trade because it may be a bad idea, because you want to trust that the stop loss possibility, right, or the volatility possibility could take it that low, right? So just some things to consider. So I think all in all, we've covered Movement Monitor, we've covered Volatility Cloud, practical application, we've covered breakout bars. I will say about the I will say about the Movement Monitor that we take into account some moving averages, we take into account crossovers, we take into account deep trend analysis, very, very sensitive trend analysis. We take into account volume, we take into account money flow, all of these things in one simple, easy to use KPI or metric that makes you feel like you're using one algo when in fact you're using closer to 7 algos. The one thing I also want to go into when it comes to the Movement Monitor is the settings. If you have long-term movement confluence, then it will not turn orange or it will not turn blue if you are not on the proper side of much larger time frame or much larger, longer moving averages, right? Like think the 200s. So if you're not on the correct side of the 200 moving average or EMAs, then it's going to say, I'm not going to turn orange for you, because don't forget, based on much larger moving averages, we're still bearish. Why would I turn orange for you, allowing you to go into a bull trade, right, or a long trade? So just kind of keep in mind, it's there for training wheels purposes, to keep you trading with the trend. The purpose is to not allow you to trade against the trend. If you're comfortable with trading against the trend, knowing it will and can be choppier, especially if you see the Nightmare on Elm Street volatility cloud lines forming, that's usually one of the more obvious ways to spot it, then you can take it off and it will turn orange, it will turn blue, regardless of what side of long-term averages it's on. And I won't go into the other 3 settings. I would suggest just leaving them on. I've back-tested these a lot, and they allow you to enter trades with a higher probability of success. You can play with them if you want to see what it looks like to have the most sensitive movement monitor, right? Turn blue the fastest, turn orange the fastest, then maybe consider shifting the settings a little bit, right? You can literally see what happens if you just have sensitive on and that's it. You can see the effect on the chart, right? Kind of looks like that. You may say, okay, I want to have sensitive and mid. Let's see what that looks like. And you can kind of play with it to see, how early does it shift? How much does it change? But my favorite, absolute favorite, just because it keeps me, more than likely keeps me out of failed trades by going for too much sensitivity, would just be these 3. This is my favorite by far, and if I wanted to be really careful, I would look to see what side of the longer term moving averages I'm on, but that's why we have 8 time frame layout charts, right? So those are the settings that I like to utilize on the movement monitor. And when you have all of these working in unison in your favor, you go through the checklist for conditions conducive, and you go through the checklist for proper entry, and you go through the checklist for risk mitigation. Do I have proper asymmetry? Am I comfortable with it? And you go through the checklist, which is a part of list number 3, for should I magnify this trade? What reason do I have to magnify this trade? And if I do magnify this trade, by how much should I magnify this trade? You go through the leverage selection part of it, then you're really, really set up well to make intelligent decisions that are radically more intelligent than your average trader, and even more radically intelligent than some of the great traders out there, to be honest. I would put these algos and this process up against any trader that I've ever seen. And I think that a talented user who understands the process, the checklists, and does things by the book will actually outperform most traders in the market, which is saying a lot because 90% of traders in all markets fail. So to outperform, the 10% of the best ones, or to even have that potential, is pretty impressive.